Hey class, we're just going to recap on today's lesson on synthesizers, and we're going to have a quick tour through the 3 or 4 basic synthesizers that come with Logic. So we talked about synth objects. Over here I've written down 3 classes of synth objects. So the first instance is mono or lead synths, which only play one note at a time and are typically used for bass lines and lead melody lines. So we can look at that first over here. The other 2 are polyphonic synths, which are used for pads, and finally step or sequence synths. So let's look at number 1, the mono lead. So I've used the ESM, which you can find it here. It's right here, monophonic synth, and it comes in one flavor, mono. And I've used it here to create a bass line, and I literally didn't even tweak it. All I did was choose analog bass 1. But let's have a listen to it, and we'll tweak it a little bit and talk about some of the things. So you could hear the way the filter was opening and closing right there in typical synth fashion. You also heard me mess with these terms actually come from organs, and they refer to what is known as the pipe length. So 8-foot pipe, 16-foot, and 32 would produce different octaves. The larger numbers produce the octave lower. So that's a quick way to transpose your notes without having to change the MIDI notes in here. So the synth is pretty basic. It only makes one note at a time. You either have a choice of triangle wave or square wave. There are no sine waves because this is generally reserved for cutting instruments that want to cut through the mix. Okay, over here are some controls for the filter. This first one is velocity. It means depending on how hard you hit the note, it'll open and close that filter more or less. So if you hit it soft, you get a kind of a darker sound. But if I hit it hard, you can hear that filter going to work. Decay is the speed at which that filter closes. And int, I believe, stands for the filter will follow the keyboard note. So as you get higher and higher up the instrument, the filter will open a little more to compensate for that higher pitch. And you can have that effect greater or less depending on this knob. I don't really use these much, honestly. Volume over here, this is your volume, master volume, decay, and how much velocity affects that volume. Finally, overdrive. Very simple synth, great bass sound, you know. Generally, when working with bass in synthesis, if you think about bass, it's just a moving speaker. So the less you mess with it, the better it's going to work. You really want that speaker to flap back and forth and push those airwaves. You don't need to add a lot of chorus or distortion. You're really just going for a pure voltage that will push a strong and steady bass sound. Okay, let's move on. So the next one that I'm going to mess with is the polyphonic synthesizer. I didn't actually record anything here, so why don't we try to record something? It sounds like this. So generally it's used for pads because we can play more than one note at once. We can choose a number of different waveforms. A nice soft sine wave I've got chosen, but I could easily choose a more sort of angular square wave for a little more color. Typically pads are not used to demand attention. They're there more as a bed to support the rest of the architecture of the work. So They're meant to function in the background. So typically, sine wave is a great way to do it. Again, we can pick different octaves right here. And we have the very same frequency cutoff information right here as we saw in the mono synth, and very similar information over here. And we have our amplitude envelope right here that we spoke about in class. Okay, so let's move on. I think we covered that in class. I'd like you to explore this yourself and try different sounds. Experiment with some of these parameters and see what you like. So now we're going to take a look at the FM synth. So let's take a look at what we got recorded. So you hear that filter opening up. That's only because I animated it that way. So okay. So this is what's getting modulated, this central wheel here. You can hear that it's creating some very high frequency information that makes it a great, powerful synthesizer to use with this kind of automation. Very effective synth. Yeah, I chose one of the presets. I believe I just looked down here and found pads, silver pad. And I would advise you to just experiment through these patches, and if you like something, look at the way it's programmed and just, tweak and learn. That's how I did it. That's how everyone does it. Very few of us actually read the manual. We just kind of mess with it until it makes sense. Okay, moving on to the ES2, which is the more advanced synthesizer that comes with Logic. This thing's a little intimidating. It's got a lot of bells and whistles. I would like to spend at least half a lesson on this instrument, mostly for this matrix section down here, how to build very nuanced and advanced type of patches that will put you a little cut above the rest of your fellow synthesists. So in this instance, I've chosen something that I found for a sequence, a fat analog sound. And I'm using this sequencer, this synth right now to demonstrate the third object, the step sequence. So to do that, once I had my synthesizer set up, I go up here and I select arpeggiator. And this brings up this cool window that allows us to quantize in 16th notes. We can change that to 8th notes. And whatever we want. I chose 16ths for this order. We can also change directions. And we can build more octaves into it. So to get use out of an arpeggiator like this, and I encourage you to experiment with these, is what we needed was a very short sound. So the way we shorten or lengthen a sound, as you know, is our A, D, S, and R parameters in our envelope. What we need here is a short amount of time and a low sustain. So here we have sustain at 0 to K at pretty short. So the time we're getting from 100% to 0 is pretty short. And it wouldn't work if we had a longer to K. So we're trying to find that sweet spot. And as you can hear, it's perfect right where it is. So these are also fantastic for sweeping EQ patches. Let's pull out the synth. Okay, now I look at my blend is pointing downwards to this half of the filter. This is our filter section. Here's our cutoff. So as I move this wheel, you'll hear how effective cutoff works on a sequenced synth like this. All right, it looks like it's been automated, so we're not having fun with that. Let me see if I can adjust that. Right. So if I delete all this, let's try that again. So with those three objects that we have just discussed, which are the mono lead bass line, the polyphonic pad, and the third stepped sequence, we can pretty much recreate most of the synth music all the way up until the mid-90s, when other things started to happen. Let's have a listen to this little arrangement. Right. And for some reason, oh, there it is, my compressor. So yeah, I added a drum beat and I sort of created a quick little arrangement. And by using this compressor, we get a sort of a pumping effect that you hear in a lot of contemporary electronic music. And have a listen. So you can see that compressor was really driving things very hard, and I would spend a lot more time on that before I actually released this. But so that's a real good look at the first couple of synthesizers. I'd like you to create something. I'm going to send this to you. It'd be great if you could create something of your own. Just experiment, see how the step sequencer works with the pad, with the bass line, and if you feel like adding a drum beat, go for it. Thanks so much, class.